Ahoy! New World dropped the general announcement for Season 6 today, as well as some interviews, some articles, lots of stuff to go through. We won't do all of that today, but there's something really weird, really important that we definitely need to talk about first, and then we'll go into some of the other details that were revealed. What we need to talk about is an announcement that is very, very questionable. In the main article about the new season, Season of Opportunity, there's a list of the new artifacts that will be coming into the game. And it mentions the 3 following artifacts will be available later in the season. That's the SLOTH Conductor's Medium Legwear, Elemental Band Ring, and Trisna Warhammer. Now, if we look at the perks of these items, they don't stand out as something that's particularly easy to break or buggy or completely overpowered in a way that could cause massive problems and would warrant a delay for these. The Legwear is while in medium armor, deal 15% more elemental damage, and this could definitely be strong, but with the medium armor restriction to it, I don't think it's too insane in a level that it would not be allowed to ever make it into the game. Likewise, the Trisna Warhammer is literally just 25% lifesteal against knockdown enemies. I think this is actually not good at all. And then the Elemental Band Ring is very weirdly specific. It says, when you hit a target with an elemental attack, not attunement or damage over time, gain 4% in power for 6 seconds, with a 10 seconds cooldown per elemental damage type, and a max 1 stack per elemental damage type. This one is, I think, a bit more complex, so it's more likely that something could be going wrong here, but it's also somewhat restricted. For example, it has keen awareness, so you can't get damage perks along with it on the ring, so doesn't sound inherently super broken to me either. So I would conclude that these artifacts are not delayed because they are so broken and overpowered. Rather, they are all part of the same thing, and that is rewards for the new raid. That brings us to a very obvious question. Will the raid itself be delayed? Before we dig into this further, if you'd like to get early trading tips for New World Aeternum, then feel free to support me on Patreon. There will be a new tip tomorrow. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do that. So the idea that the raid might be delayed is not coming up for the first time here from my angle at least. Disco Spawn and I were discussing about this over a month ago, and I was saying that it was very, very weird that the raid was never put in any of the tests at all. It was never tested on a large scale, always just small scale internally, and that it was at fairly high risk of being buggy because of that. And what I said at the time was, I'm not saying it will be delayed, I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was. And that's kind of something that I think still applies here. It is weird that the artifacts are delayed, but it's technically possible that it's really just the artifacts that are delayed and not the entire raid. On the other hand, they could release the raid later in the season and simply say, well, it's still in the same season, it's in the Season of Opportunity, it's a part of the content for the season, you're just getting it maybe 1.5 months later. And realistically, a lot of the new player base wouldn't really care that much because they'd be busy playing through the lower levels, learning the game in general. If the new raid is available right away or a little bit down the line, won't really matter that much for most fresh start players, except those who really rush straight to 65 and 700 plus gear score and want to go immediately into that raid. It would by far not be the first time that New World is delaying content, so it would really just be in line with the previous track record. On the other hand, the raid is part of all the big announcements that they're doing, so that kind of speaks against it a little bit, but again, they could just say it's coming in that season. Now there is some further speculation. There were multiple leaks. One was found by Zelenin, finding that there were mentions in the files of mutated versions of the raid, and then there was also some art concept for mutation gear rewards that look slightly different from the final version. This could easily just be a slightly trimmed down version that just works better with the in-game graphics rather than a non-mutated version of the reward, but could also be the opposite technically. I will say that I don't think these mutation mentions hint at all too much at this point. It's possible that they are planning to do that at some point down the line. It's possible that they were simply testing that earlier on, but I don't believe that we'll get a mutated version like 1.5 months down and that's where you get the artifacts. Because as we know from Amazon so far, they generally want to make the artifacts available for most players. Sure, you will have to do some degree of challenge in the content because you have to do M1 instead of story mode for many of them, but generally they are gated more through repetition. You have to do it a few times to guarantee the artifact rather than difficulty. I can't think of a single artifact that is actually tied to difficulty to any degree. The only difficulty may be finding a group for it on a dead server if we think about something like Scorpio. As such, I think this delay being due to a mutated version coming in a very short amount of time is very, very unlikely. But it would also be extremely weird if the raid as a whole was available and you could farm most of the rewards, but specifically wouldn't be able to farm the artifacts for some inexplicable reason. Maybe to keep people playing the raid longer because they kind of need to play it again for the artifacts, but then again, you need to play the raid quite a fair bit to get all the 725 gear score pieces anyway, so that doesn't really make sense to me either. As such, no matter how I look at it, it remains confusing. I definitely think this could indicate a delay of the raid, but I don't think it means a guaranteed delay of the raid, and we won't really know until the expansion, quote unquote, the new release itself is happening, and we'll know what's actually available at the start. But wait, there's more. In the new announcement video, they're also showing some gear. And this is a Frostforged piece with 725 gear score, which would be interesting because it could mean that we can get 725 gear from the Winter Runeforge trial. It's a 2-perker here, it's a purple one, which means it wouldn't be super good, but it would be an easy way to get your gear score up, which could maybe help clear the raid more effectively. However, I was a bit skeptical when I saw it, because I have seen things like this before, and I asked Mixologic about it if there's anything that would indicate that we can get those better rewards from the old quote-unquote 10-player raid. I think it was called Seasonal Trial, but whatever. And he said that this is likely not something we'll be able to get. The devs can create a bunch of modified items, something you can also often see if you go on the PTR and you get items that just don't really make any sense in terms of how they're labeled or certain things that are on them. And it's very likely that this is just one version of that just happens to have the Frostforged design here. Part of the reason why he thinks that is because there are basically other errors in this particular build as well. If you look at the rings, then you'll notice that they have rune glasses in them, which rings are not able to have normally, unless you def create them and choose to have rune glasses in there. As such, the best advice here is to not get your hopes up. Instead, you can leave me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe and click the bell if you're new. As always, a huge thanks to my patrons for supporting this video. They get the early trading tips in return. And thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.